really almost totally urbanized person. I have absolutely no skills. I mean, if you put me in the forest, I'm dead in no time. And if you put me, you know, I have too many handicaps to go on a wilderness retreat, even something safe as that. So, you know, I'm one of the most urbanized persons I know. And I used to say I thought that milk came from cartons till I was about 12, and then found out it came from cows. But this amnesia is really important. Unless we begin to do this in terms of an appreciation of our food system, that right now we live with food trucked 1,000 miles. And in this regard, and I don't say this in any kind of any obsequious way, but I mean, I do think that one of the things I've noticed when I've gone to Ontario and especially to British Columbia has been that there is a greater sense of the integrity of creation as integral to the life of the citizenry that I catch here. I catch it in pockets in this country, but I don't catch it on a large scale. But, you know, insofar as we continue to not even understand the bioregion in terms of our need for reverence for the systems in which we live, in New England, for example, and also insofar as we have an amnesia even about the food. We do not, our food is anonymous, and we really need to reclaim that.
I think it's really important for us to be very conscious of the land that's around us. And maybe because I have a special interest for Anna Maria College, but as you know, we have something like 84, 85 acres of land here. And included in this land are water sources, watersheds, habitats for, as I said earlier in the prayer, habitats we've known to even see bear tracks apparently. We have deer, we have all of the kinds of little animals that you see in wooded areas. We're working on nature trails. But I think we don't realize this until we start doing things like saying, okay, we're growing as a college, we need to put some new buildings up. But we don't even know which part of the land is actually the buildable land at this point, and we need to have a good survey done on that. But I think this whole area in Massachusetts is filled with wetlands and water sources and conservationists who are urging us to protect this land. We Sisters of St. Anne actually still own a piece of land here, and we received a letter asking us to go to a meeting with the other conservationists because part of our land has the water sources. But we get interested in this only if we're affected somehow personally by what's there. And I just wanted to make one other reference when we're talking about sustainable living and all this kind of stuff. I've been reading a book, and I'm having a senior moment because it's either called Green Sisters or Green Earth. I think it's called Green Sisters. Green Sisters. And it's a journalist who went out and lived for a number of years with sisters and nuns in various monasteries and centers for ecology. But what I want to really say is, if we need examples of people who know anything about sustainable living, we can go visit the Trappists over in Spencer, or go visit the sisters out in Vermont, or go visit any community that has lots of land. And they have been taking care of their land forever. They even have these, what do you call it, perpetual trusts on the land so that no one can ever touch it again. And we know we're also in an area, in the whole Blackstone Valley area, and in this area, like Rutland and Spencer and Paxton, these are all still growing towns. And if we were to let the developers do it, they would take every piece of green space that they could possibly get their hands on. And I think the landowners, when I went to the meeting with landowners a few months ago, anybody was at that meeting had to hold at least 10 acres of land, and the room was filled. So that's a lot of people in Paxton, Holden, and Spencer who own at least 10 acres of land, and none of them wanted to give their land up to developers.
Sister Eve, that reminds me of a question I have when she mentioned that no one wants to give their land over to the developers. And Dr. O'Hara, this is the question. You speak to many people, and the case that you made for us this morning is just, it's self-evident. At least to me, it is self-evident. But my question is, do some people say no to you? Do some people simply say, oh, get off of it? There's really, you've got to be much more realistic. This is really too heart-centered for me. I don't buy it. But do you ever get a negative response when you're going around trying to really make people aware of this new consciousness?
Some people say a lot more than no. But it's much less than before. 20 years ago, these kind of talks, we were the marginalized. We were the freaks. My predecessor, Father Stephen Dunn, who's a Passionist priest at St. Michael's, he's retired now, but he started the Elliott Allen Institute for Theology and Ecology in 1991. Now, he'd been working with Tom Berry's work since the 70s. In fact, Tom was his spiritual director when he was a novice, so they go back way, way back. But the reason they started it was because the teachers who were teaching in the Masters of Religious or taking the Masters of Religious Education program were saying, we're teaching environment in the schools, and we don't, in the Catholic school system, and we don't know how to integrate this with our faith. And so and they knew that Steve was teaching sort of ecology kind of things, and so they wanted it integrated more into the curriculum, and that's how the Institute got started. But when it got started, it met. The faculty were behind it, but there were a lot of people at the university who were against it. And to be quite honest about it, the hierarchy in our local church weren't exactly pleased about it either. And so there was a great deal of difficulty. And when you would go out and speak, there was more resistance then, and people were quite dismissive. It was tree hugging, it was airy-fairy, it lacked in scholarship, et cetera, et cetera. But once we were able to have students do their doctoral thesis in this area, that helped. And it's surprising where you get the positive reception. I actually did this talk I teach in the Environment and Health program at the University of Toronto, and they like to have a diversity of speakers. So one year they said, well, let's have you. You're sort of different, and you're sort of doing this sort of spiritual ecology kind of stuff. So why don't we have you? And one of the researchers who I had known for about 20 years, who worked in toxicology, internationally famous, at the end of the talk she came up and she said, I've been thinking about this for 20 years. I never knew how to say it. It was great to hear you say it, because that's what I've been trying to put into words for 20 years. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? So there's the resistance is much less than it used to be. The debates around, well, is climate change real? I don't run into that anymore. Occasionally I do, but when I do, I give it about as much respect as the Flat Earth Society. We've had that conversation. It's been resolved. It was resolved in the 1980s with clarity. It was further clarified in the 90s. It's time to move on. So I won't even go there anymore. I won't even have that discussion, because it's not worthwhile. But it's very rare that I ever get anyone challenging on that level. The people realize that the environmental issues are real, and they want their faith to be able to say something about it. And so they're looking for, what does my faith say? And because we are able to go back into Scripture and go back into the early church teachings and say, look, this is what we have said, we just forgot about it. People are very receptive for this. There's almost a relief at hearing this information. So yes, there is still some opposition, but it's a lot less than I used to get. I still get some, but whatever. In fact, that's good. I mean, if there wasn't some, it wouldn't keep me sharp. And also, then I remember one of my our cardinal, when he came to describe me.